All right, this is take 3. I'm going to try it again this time. All right. So, guys, I'm going to go through this video, or create this video for you to go through the last 2 sections of Chapter 7's PowerPoint. And that will wrap up stuff. I have just sent you the PowerPoints for 2, 3, and 7. So we're still on track for the exam to be on Thursday. And what little time we have on Friday while we're eating our cookies. So here we go. All right, so ethnicities and nationalities. How do they relate to one another? Those types of things is what we're going to talk about in this section 3. Dividing ethnicities from nationalities, and then certainly some ethnic diversity in parts of Asia. So let's take a look. All right, so ethnicity does not always correspond to one's nationality. Certainly here in the United States, I consider myself to be English, Scottish, Welsh, and a wee bit of Irish. But however, my nationality is quite clearly an American. I am an American. Canadians. What about the Quebecois? The Quebecois are those people who are French-speaking, French culturally associated ethnic groups in Quebec who have on a couple of occasions actually voted for independence from Canada. Never to the point where it's actually taken place, but there are some that have voted for that. There's others that said, no, we'll stay part of Canada. So that nationality, ethnicity struggle. And the United Kingdom is another perfect example where you have multiple nations coming together, but they have very different ethnicities. So you have the Scottish, the Welsh, the Irish, the Northern, and the British, finally. They have a distinct ethnic identity. Their nationality oftentimes is also associated with that, but yet they're part of a conglomerate country called the United Kingdom. So it gets kind of muddy and fuzzy when we talk about these things. As we talked about with your paper dolls, we typically consider nationality tied to citizenship. But in the case of the United Kingdom, that really doesn't apply to a great extent. Yes, they're all citizens of the United Kingdom, but they do have a national identity. The Scottish particularly have a Scottish identity. They have their own parliament here. They are autonomous within the United Kingdom. However, they're military, and they are certainly part of the parliament that exists in England as well. All right, so those things. The United Kingdom is made up of these 4 parts. Notice that Ireland is on the island of Ireland. And in their identity here is kind of interesting because while they are indeed Irish in terms of their ancestry and in terms of their ethnic identity, the people that are up here, by and large, are Protestants. So it's a religious difference. The 6 counties that make up Northern Ireland are predominantly Protestant, and that's the reason for the division, as well as a conquering that took place by the English armies many millennia ago. So there are those connections. Here in India, or what we would call South Asia, because we have Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, these 3 countries that exist today actually all were a colony of the United Kingdom or Britain. And when the Indian people obtained their independence, there was a divide that took place between the Hindu majority Indians and the Muslim majority Pakistanis. In fact, when these originally split, this was West Pakistan, this was East Pakistan, one country. Obviously, having India in the middle made it very difficult for a lot of different reasons, particularly that vast area. So they, in fact, did separate eventually. So this is now Bangladesh. But what you can notice here, or at the point of this map, is that when this occurred, when this division occurred, those who were, by and large, Muslims moved towards Pakistan, or to a lesser extent, towards Bangladesh, and those who were Hindus moved into India from those Muslim regions. And so we see this movement, this migration that takes place in order to belong to the greater ethnic group. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't some areas of conflict. They tend to be in the hinter regions or the outskirts, and they tend to be border areas that are oftentimes conflicted. So we have Jammu and Kashmir. Kashmir is a name you've likely heard before. That's the usual term for this, but it is a boundary area between Pakistan and India in the northern region. And it is a very sparse, it's a very mountainous areas. In fact, you'll notice these are all passes through the mountains. These passes through the mountains, those who control the pass, those that control the area and the access to the area. And so we have this control line, this red line that runs through it, is sort of like their own demilitarized zone where they're trying to maintain peace. Both India and Pakistan claim these areas, and the few people that live there are a mix between Muslim and Hindu. It is a crossroads area. That is a common theme that you'll see throughout this particular video, is that these crossroads regions, whether it's the Balkans, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's where the Crusades moved through, these are all transient areas. These are areas where people of very different ethnic groups come together and have passed over and crossed over these areas. Kurdistan, which is not a country, it does not exist, but this is a group of people that have a common set of characteristics, including religion, including customs, including holidays, including a lot of things. The Kurds are a people. They are what we would refer to a nation. A nation is a group of people with a common set of characteristics and heritage. They exist together. And unfortunately for the Kurds, they are what we refer to as a stateless nation, meaning they don't have a country. They don't have an area that they can call their very own. And as you see on the map here, Greater Kurdistan includes parts of many countries, including Syria, including Turkey, including Iraq, Iran, and to a smaller extent, Azerbaijan and Armenia. They're not welcome in any of those places. They are sort of a downtrodden people, kind of like the Palestinians. And as you may know, in recent history, when the United States pulled out of protections in Syria, where we were working with our Kurdish allies, our friends, here in northern Syria, when we pulled out, the Turks, who do not get along with the Kurds, went over the border and started to massacre them because we pulled out, because they were now vulnerable to President Erdogan and the Turkish army. And they do have a long struggle with the Kurds up here in Turkey. And so this is a problem here. But their identity is more ethnic. They consider themselves a nation, but they do not have a place to call home, despite the fact that they have this widespread area that they claim is their homeland. Again, as I was saying to you before, where the Crusades came through. So the Crusades come up out of Italy, across through here, and across here, as you probably remember from your world history in middle school. But take a look at this. Look at the vastness of the different ethnicities. We're not talking about nation states like we do today in terms of the French and the Polish and the German, those sorts of... There's a much finer grain detail here to the ethnicities that exist throughout this swath from really from Europe on, and actually it goes back further into former Yugoslavia, which we'll talk about in a moment, all the way through here. And so there's lots of these different ethnic groups. Now, a lot of these ethnic groups may have common ethnicities and separate by religion. Perfect example is the Arabs. These are all Arab peoples, all right? They're all Muslims, but they practice different forms of Islam. And so it becomes a point of contention. You may or may not know that Iran and Iraq don't tend to get along too well, and largely because of the Shiite populations here. Now, most of Iran is actually Persian, The light purple, it is a Persian-controlled country. And they've oftentimes had conflicts with the Shiite minorities. Within Iraq, we have large strife with Shiites versus Sunnis here within Iraq. These two groups do not tend to get along too well, and the Shiites tend to be a much more militant and aggressive ethnic group. A lot of our fundamentalists come out of the Shiite faith. And you'll notice that Syria is by and large Sunni. So there's all this aspects to religion that are in here. You'll also see that we have minor Christian domains. Again, this is from the Crusades, so you have some Christian enclaves throughout Syria and to a certain extent through Lebanon as well. When you come over here, you get into all your Estonians. Today we have all these countries along what used to be the border between the Soviet Union and Southwest Asia. But you'll see that there are lots of ethnic groups such as the Pashtun, the Punjabi, the Sindhi, the Tajiks, the Uzbekistanis, the Turkmenistanis. So there's all these small groups that are through here. Even here in the Caucasus region, where you get into the Azeris, which are the Azerbaijanis, to another extent, although they're not on this map, the Armenians are in here as well. So, obviously, lots of conflict. The fourth and last section of this chapter deals with the conflicts in general. And at their absolute apex are the ideas of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Ethnic cleansing is trying to rid an area of a particular ethnic group, whether it be through mass killings, which is genocide, or whether it be through forced migration, and in some cases trying to dilute, if you will, the genetic stock through rapes and other horrific offenses. So these are examples of ethnic cleansing, trying to weaken those ethnic ties. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Here we see in Europe, after World War II. So this is the end of World War II. Germany is being pushed back. You'll notice all these Germans being pushed back into Germany after having conquered much of Eastern Europe and certainly parts of Western Europe. We have refugees that are sent back home as well. These are people that have gotten caught over here. We have the Czechs moving out of Poland back towards the Czech area, the Czech Republic area. Czech Republic and Slovakia, those are modern day names. During actually after World War II, these two countries were pushed together and formed what was called Czechoslovakia. We also see all these countries down here. These did not exist after World War II. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo, Macedonia, and Montenegro were all part of one country that was called Yugoslavia, which you'll see in a moment, and formed this home of the Southern Slavs. It maintained itself by virtue of the Soviet Union, this green area, having influence over it and forcing it to have a communist government. In 1991, that fails. So we'll see that in a moment. In fact, we're going to see it right now. The Balkans, this area that crosses over into Turkey and the Middle East. Again, huge crossroads coming through here. And here in this brown area is that country I talked about as the home of the Southern Slavs, or Yugoslavia. And what you'll notice here, and we'll see it even more finely detailed here in a second, is that this area is home to lots of different ethnic groups. And when the Soviet Union disappears in 1991, and the influence over this area disappears, it breaks apart by virtue of nationalism. These ethnic groups saying, no, we want our own space, we want our own identity, we want our own country. And so they go and they separate. And so And you can see what happened to these lands over time. This country here becomes the most aggressive, and this has the longest standing issues here. It was a Serbian nationalist that actually started World War I. So this is an area that has played a major role in conflicts throughout history. All right, so here's Yugoslavia more defined. And what should be obvious to you is that when they start to divide up into separate countries, or based on ethnicity in groups, they try to maintain their ethnic groups' purity by having a country of just these groups. However, that becomes difficult when the fact that they've all, because they've been under communist rule and been allowed to move around within, they've all sort of spread around and created these little enclaves. The most peaceful transition was for Slovenia, and as you can see, that makes a lot of sense given that they pretty much were able to contain the Slovene area. By the way, they're a little bit different. They're more of a European people. They're not really Slavic. They have a much closer connection to Italy and Austria. Their economy was a little bit better. It just worked. All right, so Slovenia was never an issue. Croatia was an issue. Bosnia-Herzegovina was an issue. Kosovo is an issue, and to a lesser extent, Montenegro. And by and large, it was the Serbian majority that was aggressively trying to get as many lands as possible. The country that had the biggest strife, obviously, was, what do you guess? If you said Bosnia-Herzegovina, you would be correct. Obviously, because they had the largest mix of different ethnicities in this area. And they were the only ones that had large Muslims, although there are some in Serbia and there's some in Montenegro, but the largest group of Muslims were here. What's really interesting is these two countries, large Muslim population, they speak the same language, although they'll say they don't. They have the same words. They have the same syntax. They have the same all of those sort of things. What they have that's different is one uses a Cyrillic alphabet and one uses a Roman alphabet. And so it gets a little bit difficult there. But they are, in many ways, a common people. But because of that religious factor, the Muslims are different. That's what breaks this group up. And so this is a pretty interesting way of doing it, of looking at it. Serbia ends up being the aggressor in all of these places, trying to get as much land as possible. In fact, their president, Slobodan Milosevic, who has vast control, is forcing ethnic cleansing in primarily Bosnia-Herzegovina, and it eventually is arrested for committing war crimes. All right. If we take it even further in, what we see within Bosnia-Herzegovina is that while in 1991, when communism fails, there are ethnic enclaves all over the country, but what ends up happening is that there is a movement to move the Muslims to more concentrated areas, closer to the Croats, who are also of a Muslim denomination, and so they concentrate. As you can see here, they concentrate those populations. The Serbian population is isolated from the Bosniaks and the Croats, all right, in a large part. And so they work cooperatively today, but they are much more concentrated. So there's this movement, and obviously forced migration had to take place. And you'll notice that the capital is actually in the Muslim sector. These are Kosovarian children who were refugees outside of a camp. Kosovo is an area that did have ethnic cleansing, did have some violence, not nearly as much as Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the UN, with the help of the United States, did step in. In fact, Mrs. Hebert was a part of the support to Kosovo through the United States Air Force. Here we have examples of ethnic cleansing. We have these military vehicles forcing displaced Kosovo Albanian villagers to congregate here, and then they're going to be forced out of this area. So this is an example of forced migration as part of ethnic cleansing. Forced migration is a form of ethnic cleansing. All right, here we go to Africa. Now, Africa, I've told you many, many, many times, is tribal. It's very difficult, and there's lots of cases of ethnic cleansing and genocide within Africa. Largely because the colonial boundaries were built by Europeans, not by Africans. But it's also, as I'm going to show you on this next slide, this is the famous map that shows you how difficult it is to actually do that. Here we see the white lines. Those are the most commonly accepted lines. They're all drawn by European colonial holders. And then we see the red lines, which are the ethnic boundaries between the tribes. Is it any wonder that there's conflict in Africa? Is it any wonder that countries here are not quite what they should be or would be in most places? Probably not. Nigeria in particular. Nigeria is a country that's had a huge political strife, huge military coups, very difficult to control. I have a friend of mine who's actually a chief of one of these tribes, and very difficult and very deadly. He actually ran for office once in the country, and they tried to kill him. They damaged his car to a point where he lost control and got in a car accident and was out of the country for a number of months. He actually was a professor at Worcester State University, and he went home to run to be governor of one of the states within, these are not even the states, but within Nigeria they have other divisions called states. He tried to run for governor of that and was, they tried to kill him. So it's very, because it's so tribal, it's so violent. This is an issue. I would also point out that, remember that our slave trade, as we talked about earlier this week, comes out of this area here. All right, so makes sense in many ways. One of the countries that we'll look at in a second here is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or what we called Zaire when I was younger, as well as Rwanda and Burundi, which are divided between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And there's been that strike. If you ever watch the movie Hotel Rwanda, you'll get a better sense of what happened in there. All right. If I take a look at Sudan, another country in Africa, but it is in the northern part. Up here we have large Arab populations. We have more African and other ethnic groups in these green areas, as well as the now separate South Sudan. These areas were all very much repressed by this majority Arab government. And so there was lots of ethnic cleansing and forced migration, mass genocide, and particularly Darfur, as you may have heard in the news a few years ago. Darfur was an area where they were wholesale killing their own people. So it was pretty bad. And then here's the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Again, look at all the different groups, all these different ethnic groups that are obviously, now some of them are probably related to each other, but they are different. And it is no wonder that this country, for almost its entire existence, has been characterized by civil war. And two other countries, Rwanda and Burundi, again, are right here on their border. And there's been influence across the borders into Zaire. So it is no doubt, even though I don't know, they don't have Kinshasa on here, which is the capital, but I think it's down this way here. It is this area here that is largely where much of the strife takes place, out here in the western reaches, eastern reaches of the country. All right, let's see here. And I guess that's the end. So that gives you this sense of, Yeah, ethnicity is an important part. It's going to become important more so in cultural geography when we look at the different customs, and it's also going to be hugely, hugely, as you've just seen, important when we talk about political geography, which is the part that, frankly, is the most violent piece. And it is where conflicts will become most important to us. Enjoy the rest of your snow day. I'm hoping this third take works, and have a good day. I've also sent you all the PowerPoints in a PDF format. Hopefully you've got them. All right? Enjoy that snow day.